Hello, this is Dr. Mike, and welcome to week 3 of Native American history. As we saw last week, some things are developing in the early days that are worthy of our note, and I trust that you'll go back and read the interaction between your classmates, some of their postings, and interactions between other students and myself with them, because we make some great points in the discussion that I don't want you to miss in understanding what's going on between Native Americans and the early settlers that are coming into their country. Invading actually would not be a misnomer in this conclusion, because initially, as we have seen, Native Americans seek to be accommodating. They seek to help and to help them get established, but more and more people start coming, and every ship has another 100 people. And before too very long, they realize that they are being overrun, and so the tensions are going to rise. And of course, it leads to King Philip's War and other things. And you see in King Philip an attempt to accommodate or to assimilate, if you will. He wears Western clothing of a sort. He takes the English name Philip. And so there is some interest on both the Native American side and the settler side to accommodate each other. As we go forward in this class, you will realize that the accommodation on the settler side was much more about land. They had land, we want land. Once they get land, they just kind of shuffle the natives aside. And there is this growing sense as we move through this history that we need to get the Native Americans out of our way, that they are hindering progress. They are not making steps towards civilization at the rate we think they should. And from the beginning, that was one of the major points with the British when they came to this country, or to the New World. They insisted that the Native Americans could live among them as long as they civilized. And as we have said before, that word civilized is kind of an empty word. You can stuff things into it. If you go back, as we read, as I provided for you, Columbus's journal, his open assessments, beginning assessments of Native Americans would be the things that you will see them again in the 1800s. They've changed very little. The Native Americans were uncivilized. They did not wear clothes, or in effect, they did not wear European clothes. They did not have a religion, as Columbus said, yet they did have a religion. And we know from the other side of the story that we've seen in the last 2 weeks, they had a very intrinsic network of labor and a very civilized society. Everybody had a job to do. And you're going to see that that's going to be one of the factors going forward, as this labor network is destroyed by the diseases that kill off probably 2/3 of the Native Americans because they don't have immunity. That network is going to break down, and they will actually wage war with other tribes to capture people, to bring them into the network, to try to keep their labor operational. But they were lazy. The men went out and hunted and fished, and women stayed home and took care of the kids. Those kind of things will become as they get shared in travel logs and different things around Europe, and people read those. More and more people are going to be interested in the New World and what's going on here, but they will bring that assessment with them, and these settlers will certainly do the same thing. There's also the issue of the use of land in England. Of course, all the land was used, and so use meant that it was valued. Here, because so much of the land was not used, they thought it was free for the taking, and so this is going to lead to increasing important tensions between Native Americans and the settlers. This week in our studies, we're going to move to the post-Revolutionary War section of our history. And one of the interesting things, as I mentioned earlier, between the British, and especially the Cherokee in the southern part of the New World, they were friends with the British from the get-go. Every treaty that they signed was giving up land. And they basically maintained a relationship. The Cherokee actually took some of the Indian chiefs with them to England, Attaculla, which was actually the chief of the Cherokee Indians that I mean, I think I've told you that the lower tribe of the Cherokee, I was born just across the river looking at the land that village resided on. They took him from there in northwestern North Carolina. And of course, they went to Charleston and sailed to England. And they were rock stars in England. I mean, they took them out to shows and different things to meet the king several times. In fact, one of the funny stories is that Aquilicula takes a present to King George of 3 human scalps on a stick, and that's his gift to the king, which was a sign of victory and powerfulness or whatever. But they were amazed. They knew all about Great Britain's vast navy, army. They'd seen all these things. They sided with the British in the Revolutionary War, as did most other Native Americans, because they had heard the stories and they could not imagine how Great Britain could lose the war against this rabble colonist army that was ill armed and ill supplied and all the other things you could think of, that they didn't have a chance to win. And yet they're totally surprised when Great Britain did lose, as I guess most people of the world were. But they got caught on the wrong side of history. And of course, after the British withdrew, they had lost a major friend. And they operated off of a middle ground. As long as they could pit, the British against the French, they could maintain some kind. Most Native Americans could maintain some type of upper hand in trade. Trade was their main interest. They wanted the things that these Europeans brought to them, whether it be French or English or whatever. They wanted the best deal. They wanted especially guns and ammunition to hunt with. And so with the British disappearing, they lose something of that middle ground. And now they're kind of in the hands of these colonials who have won. And so they get kind of dumped on by them, and they get punished for that and declared in treaty violation. More land is taken. Moving that forward, just as a point of interest, the natives in the Civil War will actually side with the South. Again, they're the worst pickers of sides that you could possibly be. And so they side with the South. In fact, the last Confederate general standing at the end of the war was a Native American general. So again, when the Civil War is over, federal government declares them in treaty violation, shuffles the rest of them to the west of the Mississippi, starts the reservation process, and the major final chapter of the war with the Native Americans will end in that period after the Civil War between there and 1889 with the Battle of Wounded Knee. So Native Americans aren't very good at picking sides in the battles. But in this post-Revolutionary War, you're going to discuss this week the feelings of General Washington, a statement that he made about needing the Native Americans, and whether that was a true statement or whether he was just trying to avert another war. And keep in mind, a war that the colonials who had just beaten England could not have won against the Native Americans. The British really did not have that many numbers in the colonies to wage a war. They didn't have near the numbers the Native Americans had. If they had managed to link together, they could have thrown out the English and driven them back into the sea, probably. And so whether Washington is saying that out of a sense of doubt that they could win, or out of sincerity, we really don't know. That's something you're going to be assessing this week in your work. But think about Columbus's views as you read, as we move forward. What do you think the real attitude of the settlers against Native Americans? What is it? What is it really? Are they just after the land? They'll say anything, do anything to get the land, and once it's done, they'll shuffle Native Americans aside. You'll see this over and over. And I think that many of you made some great statements in your discussion this week. Let me encourage you to go back and read your classmates' post and the interaction of the class and myself with those comments, because I filled in a lot of things in the history that I think you'll find of great interest, and I hope that you will. And there's also a great article on this week's big news in Native American history that President Biden has named the first ever Native American to head the Department of Interior, which oversees Indian affairs. That is absolutely stunning. And we can hope with great hope that great things will come from that. That for the first time, we are acknowledging the Native American presence in this country. And speaking of minority treatment, none has been worse than the Native American. So I hope that you will look at that, look at some things, continue your reading with the alternate books as well. We'll take some time and go over those before the exam to kind of give you a consensus. And I look forward to seeing you each week in the live chat. So have a great day. If you have any questions, I'm more than willing, more than able to talk to you. So I look forward to seeing you. Thank you.